ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaskar my dear friends, this is 8th video on Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi's holy book called Teachings of Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi in his own words. The topic is Japa. Japa, that is the use of incantations and invocations of a divine name, is one of the most widely practiced techniques of spiritual training. It has particular affinity with the bhakti paths of love and devotion. The Maharshi approved of it, subject of course to the condition illustrated in the story of the king and his minister on page 93, that the person who practiced any incantations had been duly authorized to do so by a qualified guru. He himself occasionally authorized the use of invocations but very seldom. The point is to keep out all other thoughts except the one thought of Om or Ram or God. All incantations and invocations help to do that. The more devotion there is behind the words, the better this is accomplished, and therefore the more effective is the incantation. Devotee, when I invoke the divine name of for an hour or so, I fall into a state like sleep. On waking up, I recollect that my invocation has been interrupted, so I try again. Bhagwan, like sleep, that is right. It is the natural state. Because you now identify yourself with the ego, you look upon the natural state as something which interrupts your work. So you must have the experience repeated until you realize that it is your natural state. You will then find that the invocation is extraneous, but still it will go on automatically. Your present doubt is due to false identification of yourself with the mind that makes the invocation. Invocation really means clinging to one thought to the exclusion of all others. That is the purpose of it. It leads to absorption which ends in self-realization or jnana. Devotee, how should I practice invocation? Bhagwan. One should not use the name of God mechanically and superficially without a feeling of devotion. When one uses the name of God, one should call on Him with yearning and unreservedly surrender oneself to Him. Only after such surrender is the name of God constantly with you. In its early stages, an invocation may even be accompanied by visualization of the form of a guru or of a mythological form of God. Devotee, my practice has been continuous invocation of the names of God while breathing in and of the names of Sai Baba while breathing out. Simultaneously with this, I see the form of Baba always. Even in Bhagwan, I see Baba. The external appearances are also much alike. Bhagwan is thin, Baba was a little stout. Should I continue this method or change it? Something within tells me that if I stick to name and form, I shall never get beyond them, but I cannot understand what further to do if I gave them up. Will Bhagwan please enlighten me? Bhagwan, you may continue with your present method. When the japa becomes continuous, all other thoughts cease and one is in one's real nature, which is invocation or absorption. We turn out, we turn our minds outwards to things of the world and are therefore not aware that our real nature is always invocation. When by conscious effort or invocation or meditation, as we call it, we prevent our minds from thinking of other things, then what remains is our real nature, which is invocation. So long as you think you are name and form, you cannot escape name and form in invocation. When you realize that you are not name and form will drop off themselves. No other effort is necessary. Invocation or meditation will lead to it naturally and as a matter of course. Invocation, which is now regarded as the means, will then be found to be the goal. There is no difference between God and His name. As the above passage indicates, incantation merges with dhyana, which, for want of a better word, is translated meditation. For this reason, silent incantation is better than vocal, being more inward. Devotee, is not mental invocation better than oral? Bhagwan, oral incantation consists of sounds. The sounds arise from thoughts, for one must think of before one expresses one's thoughts in words. The thoughts form the mind, therefore mental invocation is better than oral. Devotee, should not we contemplate the invocation and repeat it orally also? Bhagwan, when the invocation becomes mental, which is the need for sound, on becoming mental, it becomes contemplation. Meditation, contemplation, and mental invocation are the same. When thoughts cease to be promiscuous and one thought persists to the exclusion of all others, it is said to be contemplation. The object of invocation or meditation is to exclude varied thoughts and confine oneself to one thought. Then that thought too vanishes into its source, which is pure consciousness or the self. The mind first engages in invocation and then sinks into its own source. This is certain. Worship, incantations, and meditation are performed respectively with the body, the voice, and the mind, and in this they are of ascending order of value. One can regard this eightfold universe as a manifestation of God, and whatever worship is performed in it is excellent as worship of God. The repetition of aloud of his name is better than praise. Better still is its faint murmur. But the best is repetition with the mind, and that is meditation above referred to. Better than such broken thoughts, meditation is its steady and continuous flow like the flow of oil or of a perennial stream. Now next topic is Karma Marga. Little need be said here about Karma Marga, the path of action, since it has been dealt with in an earlier chapter. The Maharshi discouraged unnecessary activities on the one hand and attempted to renounce activity on the other, enjoining performance of the necessary routine activities of life in a detached manner simultaneously with the practice of inquiry or devotion. Devotee, Swami, how can the grip of the ego be loosened? Bhagwan, by not adding new vasanas, innate tendencies to it. Devotee, how does activity help? Will it not add to the already heavy load that has to be removed? Bhagwan, actions performed with no thought of the ego purify the mind and the help to fix it in meditation. Devotee, but suppose one were to meditate incessantly without activity. Bhagwan, try and see. Your innate tendencies will not let you. Meditation, dhyana comes only step by step with the weakening of innate tendencies by the grace of the Guru. Methods graded. Although the Maharshi recognized all methods, he graded them as more or less direct and effective, as is shown in the above quotations of verse 4 to 7 of the Essence of Instruction. The following exposition also makes this clear. Examination of the ephemeral nature of external things leads to dispassion, vairagya. Hence, inquiry is the first and most important step. When it becomes automatic, it results in indifference to wealth, fame, ease, pleasure, and so on. The I thought is traced to the source of the I in the heart, which is the final goal. However, if the aspirant is temperamentally unsuited for self inquiry, he must develop devotion. It may be to God or Guru or mankind in general, or ethical laws, or even an ideal of beauty. As any of these takes possession of him, other attachments grow weaker and dispassion develops. Attachment to the object of devotion grows until it dominates him completely, and with it grows concentration, ekagrata, with or without visions and direct aids. If neither inquiry nor devotion appeals to him, he can gain tranquility by breath control. This is the way of yoga. If a man's life is in danger, all his interest centers around the one point of saving it. If the breath is held, the mind cannot afford to jump out at its beloved outer objects, and it does not do so. Therefore, there is peace of mind as long as the breath is held. Since all one's attention is concentrated on the breath, other interests are abandoned. Then also any passion results in irregular breathing. A, a paroxysm of joy is in fact as painful as one of grief, and both result in disturbed breathing. Real peace is happiness, and pleasures do not produce happiness. If the aspirant is unsuited to the first two methods by temperament, and to the third on account of age or health, he must try karma marga, the path of good deeds and social service. His nobler instincts are thus developed, and he derives personal happiness from his actions. His ego becomes less assertive, and its good side is enabled to develop. He thus in course of time comes to be suited for one of the three former paths of, or his intuition may be developed by karma marga alone. Chapter 7, the goal. Devotee, what is the purpose of self-realization? Bhagwan, self-realization is the final goal, and is itself the purpose. Devotee, I mean, what use is it? Bhagwan. Why do you ask about self realization? Why don't you rest content with your present state? It is evident that you are discontented, and your discontent will come to an end if you realize the self. The above question was seldom asked because those who came to the Maharshi usually understood at least the state of spiritual ignorance, or as Christianity puts it, of a fallen man, is undesirable, and that self realization is the supreme goal. In the following dialogue, the purpose is asked with more understanding, and therefore the answer also goes deeper. Devotee, what is the goal of this process? Bhagwan, realizing the real. Devotee, what is the nature of reality? Bhagwan, A. Existence without beginning or and eternal. B. Existence everywhere, endless, infinite. C. Existence underlying all forms, all changes, all forces, all matter, and all spirit. The many change and pass away, whereas the one always endures. D. The one displaces the triads such as knower, knowledge, and known. The triads are only appearances in time and space, whereas the reality lies beyond and behind them. They are like a mirage over the reality. They are the result of delusion. Devotee, if I am also an illusion, who cast off the illusion? Bhagwan. The I cast off the illusion of I and yet remains I. Such is the paradox of self-realization. The realized do not see any contradiction in it. It is surprising how many philosophers and theologians have failed to understand what is implied by self realization and have misrepresented and even attacked or belittled it. All that it means, as Bhagwan explains in the passage just quoted, is realizing reality, realizing what is, and reality remains the same, eternal and unchanging, whether one realizes it or not. One can, of course, understand the annoyance and frustration of philosophers who wish to grasp everything with the mind on being told that reality lies beyond and behind the tide of knower, knowledge, and known, which is like a mirage over it. For obviously, the mirage cannot penetrate to that which underlies it. That's why no easy answer can be given to them. Indeed, Bhagwan did not on the whole approve of questions about the meaning and nature of realization, because his purpose was to help the questioner and not to satisfy mental curiosity. He usually reminded people that what is needed is effort to attain self knowledge, and when that is attained, the questions will not arise. Some people who come to here don't ask me about themselves but about the Jivan Mukta, liberated while still embodied. Does he see the world? Is he subject or destiny? Can one be liberated only after leaving the body or while yet alive? Should the body of a sage resolve itself into light or disappear from sight in a miraculous way? Can one who leaves a corpse behind at death be liberated? Their questions are endless. Why worry about all these things? Does liberation consist in knowing the answer to these questions? So I tell them, never mind about liberation. First, find out whether there is such a thing as bondage. Examine yourself first. He sometimes pointed out that even to speak of self-realization is a delusion, an illusory escape from an illusory prison. Bhagwan, in a sense, speaking of self-realization is delusion. It is only because people have been under the delusion that the non-self is the self and unreal the real, that they have to be weaned out of it by the other delusion called self-realization. Because actually the self is the self and there is no such thing as realizing it. Who is to realize what and how when all that exists is the self and nothing but the self? One thing which impedes understanding, especially in theologians, is the contrast between self realization and sainthood and the mistaken idea that it may represent a difference between various religious traditions, one striving for sainthood and another for realization. This idea is quite ungrounded. There have been saints in every religion, Hinduism as well as others. They differ very much among themselves, both in individual characteristics, from the rapturous to the serene, from the austere to the benign, from the subtle philosopher to the simple minded, and also in a degree of attainment. Some of them possess supernatural powers, some are swept away in ecstatic bliss, some consume themselves in loving service to mankind. All have a purity beyond that of ordinary man. Their state may be called heavenly even while on earth, and yet all this falls short of self-realization. All this is in the state of duality where God or self is the other, where prayer is necessary and revelation possible. In strict theory, they are as far removed as the ordinary man from self-realization, since there is no common measure between the absolute and the conditioned, the infinite and the limited. A million is no nearer to infinity than 100. This complete gulf is illustrated by the Buddhist story of the man who wanders about the earth seeking for a lost jewel which all the time is on his brow. When at last it is pointed out to him, all his years of search and wandering have done nothing to bring him nearer to it. And yet, in actual fact, if he had not gone searching, he would not have found it. And in actual fact, the saint can be considered nearer to realization than ordinary man, just as it is easier for an ordinary man to attain realization than for a dog, although both alike are limited to the illusion of individual being. There are stages of attainment of the saints, just as there is hierarchy of heavens, and both of these correspond to the degrees of initiation in indirect spiritual paths. Bhagwan would answer questions about this when specifically asked, but did not usually speak of it, since his purpose was not to raise his followers from grade to grade of apparent reality, but to direct them towards the one eternal universal reality. Devotee, do we go to Swarg heaven as a result of our actions here? Bhagwan, heaven is as real as your present life, but if we ask who we are and discover the self, what need is there to think of heaven? Devotee, is Vaikuntha heaven in the Supreme Self? Bhagwan, where is the Supreme Self or heaven unless in you? But heaven may appear to one involuntarily. Bhagwan, does this world appear involuntarily Similarly, he would briefly acknowledge grades of development in the individual but would not dwell on them. The yogic centers counting from the bottom upwards are a series of centers in the nervous system, each having its own kind of power or knowledge. When someone told him about a present day saint who was said to be constantly inspired by an incarnation of God and to speak only as divinely directed, and he asked him whether this was true or not, he replied, "As true as all this that you see around you. For as compared with the self, neither this physical world nor any higher world is inherently real, just as compared with infinity, a big number has no more meaning than a small one. A saint may attain a lofty grade without even conceiving of the ultimate reality of oneness or having only brief ecstatic intimations of it. That does not matter. The power of his purity and inspiration will eventually sweep him onwards, either in this life or beyond. For one who envisages the ultimate goal and strives towards it, there are no stages. Either he is realized or he is not. About this, Bhagwan spoke willingly and explicitly because this was the path he enjoined. There are no stages in realization or mukti. There are no degrees of liberation. Devotee, there must be stage after stage of progress before attaining the absolute. Are there different levels of reality? Bhagwan, there are no levels of reality. There are only levels of experience for the individual, not of reality. If anything can be gained, which which was not there before, it can also be lost, whereas the absolute is eternal here and now. However, although there are no stages of self-realization, there are what might be called previews, glimpses, which are not yet stabilized or made permanent. Sometimes, indeed, these occur to people who in this lifetime have had no spiritual training at all, as as the opacity of the aspirant's ego lessens with the training in abnegation, he becomes more liable to them. Even great mystic philosophers such as Plotinus or Mr. Eckhart have, by their own admission, been dependent on them not having attained to the permanent state of identity from which Bhagwan taught. Can a man become a high official merely by seeing one? He may become one only if he strives and equips himself for the position. Similarly, can the ego, which is in bondage as the mind, become the divine self simply because it has once glimpsed that it is the self? Is this not impossible without the destruction of the mind? Can a beggar become a king by merely visiting a king and declaring himself to be one? Devotee, can self-realization be lost again after once being attained? Bhagwan, realization takes time to steady itself. The self is certainly within the direct experience of everyone, but not in the way people imagine. One can only say that it is as it is. Just as incantations and other devices can prevent fire from burning a man who otherwise it would do so. So Vasana's inherent tendencies impelling one to desire one thing and to shun another can veil the self when otherwise it would be apparent. Owing to the fluctuations of the Vasanas, realization takes time to steady itself. Spasmodic realization is not enough to prevent rebirth, but it cannot become permanent as long as there are vasanas. In the presence of a great master, vasana cease to be active and the mind becomes still, so that samadhi absorption in the realization results. Just as in the presence of various devices fire does not burn, thus the disciple gains true knowledge and right experience in the presence of a master. But if this is to be established further, effort is necessary. Then he will know it to be his real being, and thus he liberated with while still living. Some armchair critics have claimed that the quest of self-realization is arrogant or presumptuous or does not involve the humility and self-effacement of sainthood. If instead of theorizing they undertook the eradication of the vasanas which are the roots of the ego, they would soon see. Actually, it is beyond both arrogance and humility, beyond all pairs of opposite. It is simply what is. It involves not merely the humbling of the ego, but its complete dissolution. You are the self even now, but you confuse your present consciousness or ego with the absolute consciousness or self. This false identification is due to ignorance, and ignorance disappears together with the ego. Killing the ego is the only thing to be done. Realization always exists, no attempt need be made to attain it, for it is not anything external or new to be acquired. It is always and everywhere, here and now too. Devotee, this method seems to be quicker than the usual ones of cultivating the various alleged to be necessary for realization. Bhagwan, yes, all vices center around the ego. When the ego is gone, realization results naturally. Having spoken of the saint and the mystic philosopher, mention should also be made of the occultist. That is the person who seeks realization for the sake of the supernatural powers it may bring. This Bhagwan always discouraged. Realization may bring powers with it as the higher includes the lower, but desire for power will impede realization, as the quest for the lower state negates the higher power. If the objective is the endowment of the ego with new powers, how can it at the same time be the liquidation of the ego? Such a person has not understand what realization is. Devotee, what are the powers of Superman? Bhagwan, whether the powers are high or low, whether of the mind or what you call the supermind, they exist only with reference to him who possesses them. Find out who that is. Bhagwan, he that would abide in the self should never swerve from his one pointed attention to the self or the pure being that he is. If he slips or swerves away from that state, several kinds of vision conjured up by the mind may be seen, but one should not be misled by such visions, which may be of light or space, nor by the nada or subtle sounds that may be heard, nor by the visions of a personified God, seen either within oneself or outwardly as if they had an objective reality. One should not mistake any of these things for the reality. When the principle of intellection by which these visions and so on are cognized or perceived is itself false or illusory. How can the objects thus cognized, much less the visions perceived, be real? There are some foolish persons who, not realizing that they themselves are moved by the divine power, seek to attain all supernatural powers of action. They are like the lame man who said, I can dispose of the enemy if someone will hold me up on my legs. Since peace of mind is permanent in liberation, how can they who yoke their mind to powers which are unattainable accept through the activity of the mind, become merged in the bliss of liberation which subdues the agitation of the mind. Devotee, can a yogi know his past lives? Bhagwan, do you know the present life so well that you wish to know the past? Find the present, then the rest will follow. Even with your present limited knowledge, you suffer much. Why should you burden yourself with more knowledge? Is it so as to suffer more? Devotee, does Bhagwan use occult powers to make others realize the self, or is the mere fact of Bhagwan's realization enough for that? Bhagwan, the spiritual force of realization is far more powerful than the use of all occult powers, inasmuch as there is no ego in the sage, there are no others for him. What is the highest benefit that can be conferred on you? It is happiness, and happiness is born of peace. Peace can reign only where there is no disturbance, and disturbance is due to thoughts that arise in the mind. When the mind is itself absent, there will be perfect peace. Unless a person has annihilated the mind, he cannot gain peace and be happy. And unless he himself is happy, he cannot bestow happiness on others. Since, however, there are no others for the sage who has no mind, the mere fact of his self-realization is itself enough to make the others happy too. When asked if occult power siddhis can be achieved with the divine state, Ishvartva, as mentioned in the last verse of the Dakshinamurti Stotra, the Maharshi said, let the divine state be achieved first and then the other questions may be raised. No powers can be extended into self-realization, so how can they extend beyond it? People who desire powers are not content with their idea of pure consciousness. They are inclined to neglect the supreme happiness of realization for the sake of powers. In search of these, they follow byways instead of the high road, and so risk losing their way in order to guide them aright and keep them on the high road. They are told that powers accompany realization. In fact, realization comprises everything, and the realized man will not waste a thought on power. Let people first get realization and then seek powers if they still want. Thank you, my dear friend, for watching this video. Please like, comment, and share the video and subscribe the channel. Thanks a lot. Namaskar, namaskar, my dear friends. Namaskar.